Hello! Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and adventures. Tonight, we're diving into the absolute wildest theories about Stranger Things Season 5, Volume 2. I'll be covering all the craziest predictions I can fit in for tonight. From character deaths to secret villains to monsters we haven't even met yet. There's definitely more than enough to keep us busy. So we'll start with a quick recap of what Volume 1 actually gave us because, honestly, some of that was already pretty insane. Then we'll move on to the theories themselves. The ones about who's dying, who's the real villain, and whether everything we think we know is about to get flipped on its head. Plenty to get talking about, but if you like what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider subscribing down below. But for now, grab your coziest blanket and your favourite snack, settle in for some proper theorising, and let's begin. So before we dive into the truly wild stuff, let's talk about what we actually know from Volume 1, because honestly, some of this is already pretty crazy. Volume 1 dropped on November 26th, giving us 4 episodes that left us with way more questions than answers. Volume 2 is coming on Christmas Day, which is both a gift and incredibly cruel, because we're going to be theorising through the entire holiday. And then the finale, the actual finale of the entire series, drops on New Year's Eve. They're really making us wait for this one. So Volume 1 gave us 4 episodes, and I'm not going to lie, they were packed with reveals. The season opens with something we've technically seen before, but never fully understood. That opening flashback in Episode 1 takes us all the way back to 1983, to the night Will Byers vanished. We've seen bits and pieces of this moment across the seasons, but this time we're actually in the Upside Down, watching it happen from Vecna's perspective. We see young Will on his bike, we see the Demogorgon chasing him, and then we see something new. Vecna himself, or Henry Creel, or One, whatever you want to call him at this point, deliberately infecting Will with the hive mind connection. It wasn't random, it wasn't an accident, it was planned from the very beginning. That's a pretty massive reveal when you think about it. Everything that's happened to Will across 5 seasons, all the possession and the connection to the Upside Down, and the visions, it all traces back to that first night. Vecna chose him specifically. The season picks up in fall 1987, about a year after the events of Season 4. Hawkins is under military quarantine, which looks exactly as grim as it sounds. There are checkpoints, soldiers everywhere, and the Upside Down has basically started merging with the real world in certain spots. The military has even set up a base inside the Upside Down itself, which seems like a spectacularly bad idea. But here we are, they're being led by Dr. K, played by Linda Hamilton, who is absolutely ruthless in her mission to capture 11 and use her for experiments. Fun fact, Hamilton is a massive Stranger Things fan and apparently had to figure out how to be a fangirl and an actress at the same time, which is honestly pretty relatable. The big character moment everyone's been talking about is Will's power reveal in Episode 4. The episode is literally called Sorcerer, which should have been a hint. Will, Mike, Lucas and Robin are being chased by Demogorgons, and it looks like they're completely done for. Then Will just stops. He gets this look on his face, his nose starts bleeding exactly like Eleven's always does, and he tears apart 3 Demogorgons using nothing but his mind. He can see through their eyes, he realises, and he uses that connection to snap their limbs and kill them. According to the Duffer Brothers in their Variety interview, they've been planning for Will to have powers for as long as they can remember. It's been in the works since the beginning. What's really interesting is how Will unlocks his powers. It comes right after a conversation with Robin, where she talks about coming to terms with her own identity and realising she had all the answers inside herself. The show is pretty clearly drawing a parallel between Will accepting his queerness and accessing his abilities. It's a nice moment, actually. Will spent so much time feeling like a victim, and this is him reclaiming his power. Then there's Max. We finally find out where she's been since falling into a coma at the end of Season 4. 11 couldn't sense her consciousness, and now we know why. She's been trapped inside Vecna's mind prison, hiding out in a cave system that Vecna is apparently terrified to enter. She's been there for a year, just surviving in this nightmare dimension made from Henry Creel's memories. She almost escaped once when Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill started playing in her hospital room, but the portal vanished right as the song stopped. Now she's not alone anymore, though. Holly Wheeler, Nancy and Mike's little sister, gets abducted by a Demogorgon in episode 2 and ends up in the same mind prison. The two of them team up, which is wild because Holly is 7 years old and Max is a traumatized teenager, but they're making it work. Another huge reveal is Carly, also known as 11's sister, from the lab. A lot of people thought her storyline had been abandoned after that controversial Season 2 episode where 11 goes to Chicago to find her. But nope, she's back. Hopper and 11 break into the military's upside-down facility, expecting to find Vecna, and instead they find Carly being held prisoner. Dr. K has been using her, probably for her illusion powers, and now 11's got her sister back. The Volume 2 trailer shows 11 asking Carly to help her hunt down and kill Vecna, so we're definitely getting a powered sibling team up. There's also this mysterious wall in the Upside Down that nobody can quite figure out. It's circular, fleshy, and it's clearly protecting something. Wounded Demogorgons keep retreating to it, and Dustin theorizes that whatever's inside is important. Some people think it's Vecna's true lair, others think it might be the Mind Flayer's core. Either way, it's going to be important. And here's the thing that's actually kind of shocking. Nobody died in Volume 1, not a single major character. Karen Wheeler got attacked by the Demogorgon and survived. Ted Wheeler got thrown through a wall and survived. Hopper strapped on a bomb vest and didn't use it. Everyone made it through, which means Volume 2 is probably going to be brutal to make up for it. But talking a bit about the upcoming episodes themselves, we've got some clues about what's coming. Now, the Duffer Brothers have been pretty generous with information about Volume 2, which is both exciting and kind of nerve-wracking because, they're only telling us things that won't spoil the real surprises. Ross Duffer actually posted on his Instagram about the 3 episodes we're getting on Christmas Day, complete with episode titles and some very cryptic descriptions. Episode 5 is called Shock Jock. According to Ross, it picks up moments after the end of Sorcerer, so we're jumping right back into the chaos of Will discovering his powers. Frank Darabont is directing, and he's back after directing Episode 3, but apparently this one is very different from his previous work on the show. The description says it's far darker and far scarier, which is saying something for a show that already features flesh monsters and demonic possession. I'm guessing this is where we see the immediate fallout of everything that happened in Episode 4, and probably where the characters start figuring out how to use Will's new abilities. Episode 6 is Escape from Camazotz, and this is the one everyone's really curious about. It's directed by Sean Levy, who's been with the show since the beginning, and the Duffers said it's the biggest episode of the 3. They also mentioned that the performances make them cry every time they watch it, which is not ominous at all. Fun fact, Camazotz is a direct reference to A Wrinkle in Time, the Madeleine L'Engle novel that Holly Wheeler has been obsessed with all season. In that book, Camazotz is a planet where everyone's minds are controlled by a giant evil brain called IT. The parallels to Vecna's mind prison are pretty obvious. Holly even compares her situation to being trapped on Camazotz in Episode 4, so the title basically confirms that this episode is about Max and Holly trying to escape from Vecna's mental prison. Whether they succeed or not is the real question. Episode 7 is called The Bridge. This one was co-directed by the Duffer Brothers and Sean Levy, and they're being super secretive about it. All they've said is that, aside from the finale, it's probably the most emotional chapter of the season. They also mentioned it's going to be a long 6-day wait between this episode and the finale, which feels like they're preparing us for a massive cliffhanger. My guess is this episode is where we get some kind of major sacrifice or loss that sets up the final battle. The title itself is interesting too, a bridge between what and what, between the kids and Vecna, between life and death, between dimensions. It could mean anything, which is probably intentional. And then there's episode 8, the finale, titled The Right Side Up. The runtime has been confirmed at 2 hours and 5 minutes, which is basically a full movie. Netflix is even doing theatrical screenings in select cities on New Year's Eve, so people can watch it together in cinemas, which is actually pretty cool. The title is obviously the opposite of the Upside Down, which suggests that by the end of this, the dimensions might finally be separated for good. Or everyone dies trying. Could go either way, honestly. The Duffers have also confirmed that runtimes for episodes 5, 6 and 7 are coming soon, but based on past seasons, we're probably looking at anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes each. So Volume 2 alone is going to be roughly 4 to 5 hours of content. But knowing episode titles is one thing. The real question is what's actually going to happen in them, and that's where the theories come in. So let's start with the theory that's been haunting fans since season 1. The Thessal Hydra. If you've been following Stranger Things theories at all, you've probably heard this one. It's one of the oldest predictions in the entire fandom, and honestly, it makes more and more sense the longer you think about it. The basic idea is this. In the very last scene of season 1, after Will has been rescued and everything seems okay, the kids sit down to play Dungeons and Dragons again. They're fighting a monster called the Thessal Hydra. Will rolls the dice, and he wins. The campaign ends. Everyone celebrates. It's a nice, happy moment that bookends the season. Except here's the thing. Every major monster in Stranger Things has come directly from Dungeons and Dragons. The Demogorgon in Season 1, that's a D&D creature. The Mind Flayer in Seasons 2 and 3, also from D&D, Vecna in Season 4. Literally one of the most iconic villains in D&D history. The show has always used the kids' campaigns as a way to name and understand the threats they're facing. It's not just flavour text, it's a pattern. So what happened to the Thessal Hydra? It was introduced in that final campaign, the kids defeated it in the game, and then it never showed up in the actual story. Which seems weird, right? The Duffer Brothers don't usually include things without purpose. If they bothered to spotlight the Thessal Hydra with that much emphasis in Season 1, there's a pretty good chance it was set up for something later. Let's talk about what a Thessal Hydra actually is in D&D lore. It's a massive reptilian creature with 8 heads arranged in a circle around a gaping mouth filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It's not subtle. It's not metaphorical. It's a beast designed for final battles, the kind of enemy you only face after completing an entire journey. It's pure physical presence, gigantic, grotesque, and impossible to ignore. And here's where it gets interesting. There have been hints about this creature throughout the later seasons. In Season 4, Will gives Mike a painting that depicts their friend group fighting a 3-headed red dragon. At the time, everyone focused on the emotional weight of the scene, Will's feelings for Mike, the whole subtext of it all. But what if the painting was also literal? What if Will was unconsciously painting a prophecy? Then there's Nancy's vision. When Vecna gets inside her head in Season 4, he shows her a glimpse of the future. When she reports back to the others, she describes seeing a giant creature with a gaping mouth. That description matches the Thessal Hydra perfectly. A circular mouth, massive size, absolutely terrifying. Fun fact, there's even a moment in Season 4 when Nancy, Steve and Robin are running around in the Upside Down and they hear this loud, terrible sound. They wonder what caused it, if it was an earthquake or something, but they're too busy dealing with Vecna to investigate. The subtitles for that scene actually describe it as a creature roaring off screen. A creature they don't see, don't identify, and don't encounter. But it's there. The theory is that the Thessal Hydra has been lurking in the Upside Down this entire time. And Season 5 is when we finally meet it. It would be perfect from a storytelling perspective. The show has always been strongest when it revisits its origins, when it calls back to those early moments that made us fall in love with it in the first place. friendship, the D&D table, that feeling of something small spiraling completely out of control. The Thessal Hydra represents all of that. It's the monster from the very first campaign coming to life, bringing the story full circle. Visually, it would be perfect too. The Demogorgon was relatively humanoid, creepy, but still recognizable as a creature. The Mind Flayer was more conceptual, a shadow monster made of particles and smoke. But the Thessal Hydra? That's pure physical nightmare. It's the kind of monster that doesn't need dialogue or long explanations. It just appears and forces everyone to react. It's the culmination of everything the show has built toward. There's also the numerology angle, which I know sounds kind of out there, but bear with me. The Thessal Hydra has 8 heads. Stranger Things has always played with numbers. 11, 8, 1. The lab children were all numbered. What if the 8 heads represent something? The 8 remaining lab children? 8 dimensions? 8 gates that need to be closed? I'm not saying this is definitely the answer, but the show does love its symbolism. Some fans think the Thessal Hydra might not be a separate creature at all, but another form of the Mind Flayer. That the Mind Flayer can take multiple shapes depending on what it needs, and the spider-like shadow monster we've seen is just one version. The Thessal Hydra could be its true form, or its final form, the shape it takes for the ultimate battle. That would explain why we haven't seen it yet. It's been saving itself. The thing that really sells this theory for me, though, is the pattern. Stranger Things doesn't introduce D&D monsters for fun. Every creature that gets named in a campaign eventually shows up in the real world. The Demogorgon, the Mind Flayer, Vecna, they all followed this exact trajectory. The kids play the game, they name the threat, and then the threat becomes real. The Thessal Hydra is the only named creature from their campaigns that hasn't appeared yet. It's the missing piece. And if you think about the narrative structure, it makes perfect sense. Season 1 ends with them defeating the Thessal Hydra in the game. Season 5 should end with them defeating it in reality. It's poetic, it's symmetrical, it's exactly the kind of full-circle storytelling the Duffer Brothers love. The only real argument against this theory is that the show already has Vecna as the main villain, and introducing a completely new monster in the final episodes might feel rushed. But what if the Thessal Hydra isn't new? What if it's been there all along, just waiting? What if Vecna himself doesn't even know about it? That's the theory. And honestly, it's hard to argue with the evidence. Now, speaking of villains we might not fully understand yet, let's talk about whether Vecna is even the real threat we should be worried about. Now let's talk about a theory that would absolutely flip the entire series on its head. What if Vecna isn't the main villain? What if he never was? This is one of those theories that sounds kind of ridiculous at first, but the more you dig into it, the more sense it makes. The basic premise is this. The Mind Flayer, that massive spider-like shadow creature from seasons 2 and 3, is actually the real big bad of Stranger Things. Not Vecna. Not Henry Creel. Not one. The Mind Flayer. And Vecna? He's just another pawn. A puppet with delusions of grandeur. I love this theory, honestly. It recontextualizes everything. The strongest piece of evidence comes from a place most people wouldn't expect. Stranger Things. The first Shadow, the prequel play that's currently running on Broadway and in London's West End. The play was written by Kate Treffry, one of the show's writers, and created by the Duffer Brothers themselves, which makes it officially canon to the Stranger Things universe. And what it reveals about Henry Creel's origin story is massive. In the play, we see Henry as a young kid living in Nevada with his family. He's not a monster yet. He's just a weird, slightly creepy child with abilities he doesn't fully understand. One day, while playing, Henry enters a cave and gets accidentally transported to Dimension X. That's the alternate dimension we saw. 11 Cent Adult. Henry 2 in Season 4, the place that eventually became connected to the Upside Down. But here's the critical part. While Henry is in Dimension X, he encounters the Mind Flayer. Not a mind flayer that Henry created, not a mindless entity that Henry shaped and controlled. The mind flayer, an ancient, intelligent, malevolent force that already existed in that dimension, and it possessed him. According to the play, the mind flayer is what gave Henry his powers. It's what corrupted him. It's what turned him from a strange but relatively normal kid into the monster he would eventually become. Henry didn't create the mind flayer like he claimed in season 4. The mind flayer created him. This completely changes the power dynamic of the entire series. In season 4, Vecna tells Eleven that when he first arrived in the Upside Down, he found this shapeless, mindless entity floating around, and he gave it purpose. He shaped it into the spider form. He made it what it is. That's his version of events anyway. But what if he's wrong? What if he's been lying to himself? What if the mind flayer let him think he was in control because it served the mind flayer's purposes? Think about it from a narrative perspective. This is a classic villain trope. The apprentice who thinks he's the master. The puppet who doesn't realise there are strings. It's Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine. It's Saruman and Sauron. The powerful villain who's secretly serving an even greater evil. Stranger Things has always drawn from these kinds of stories, so why wouldn't it use this structure for its final twist? And honestly, it makes sense with what we've seen of the Mind Flayer's behaviour. This thing is smart, it's strategic, it plans. Back in Season 2, it possessed Will and used him to spy on the group, feeding information back to itself. In Season 3, it created an entire army of flayed humans, melting them down and combining them into a giant flesh monster. These aren't the actions of a mindless entity. These are calculated, intelligent moves designed to achieve a specific goal. That goal, according to everything we've learned, is to merge dimensions, to spread its influence from the Upside Down into the real world, and consume everything. That's what the Mind Flayer wants. Total domination across all realities, and Vecna, he's just the tool it's using to open the gates. There's also the question of where the Mind Flayer is right now. We haven't seen it since Season 3, when the gate was closed and the flesh monster was destroyed. It's been conspicuously absent from Season 4 and the first part of Season 5. Vecna has been the focus, the visible threat, the monster everyone's trying to defeat. But the Mind Flayer? It's still out there. We know it is because Will can still sense it. He can still feel when it's close, when it's active. That connection never went away. So what's it doing? Why isn't it fighting? The theory is that the Mind Flayer is conserving its strength. It's been hurt before, damaged by 11 and the others, and it's not going to risk another battle until it's absolutely ready. It's letting Vecna do the heavy lifting, letting him open the gates and weaken the barriers between dimensions. And when the time is right, when Vecna has done everything the Mind Flayer needs him to do, that's when it'll make its move. The real final battle won't be against Vecna, it'll be against the thing that's been controlling him all along. Fun fact, the Duffer Brothers have been super cagey about this whole question. When Variety asked them directly whether Vecna or the Mind Flayer is the true villain of Stranger Things, Matt Duffer said, and I quote, "You're asking a question that will be answered in the final episode." He refused to commit either way. He just said they'd talk about it after the show's over, which is basically confirmation that there's a twist coming, right? If the answer was straightforward, if Vecna really is the ultimate big bad, and that's it, they'd just say so. The fact that they're being secretive suggests the truth is more complicated, and the most likely complication is that Vecna isn't actually in charge. There's also a power level argument to consider here. In Season 3, we saw that the Mind Flayer, even in its proxy flesh monster form, didn't have psychokinetic abilities on its own. It was massive and dangerous, sure, but it couldn't throw people around with its mind like Vecna can. Its strength came from its size and its hive mind, not from individual power. So if we're comparing raw psychic ability, Vecna might actually be stronger than the Mind Flayer in a direct confrontation. But that's thinking about it wrong. The mind flayer doesn't need to be stronger than Vecna. It just needs to be smarter. It needs to manipulate him, to use him, to make him think he's the one in control while it pulls the strings. And that's exactly what it's been doing since Henry was a child. The play makes it clear that Henry's first encounter with the mind flayer happened when he was young, decades before he became Vecna. That entity has been influencing him, shaping him, corrupting him for his entire life. By the time 11 sent him to the Upside Down in 1979, he was already compromised. He just didn't know it. So when he claims he shaped the mind flayer, he's probably repeating what the mind flayer wanted him to believe. It's psychological manipulation on a cosmic scale. Make your puppet think he's the puppeteer, and he'll never try to cut the strings. If this theory is correct, and I'm increasingly convinced it is, then the final battle of Stranger Things is going to be a two-stage fight. First, they'll have to defeat Vecna. That's the obvious threat, the enemy they can see. But once Vecna is gone, once that barrier is removed, that's when the mind flayer will reveal itself. That's when the real fight begins. And here's the terrifying part. The mind flayer has been preparing for this moment for decades. It's been patient. It's been careful. It's been using Vecna to do all the dangerous work while it waited in the shadows, gathering strength. When it finally makes its move, our heroes might not be ready. That's the theory anyway. And the more you look at the evidence, the harder it is to dismiss. But since we're talking about Vecna and the mind flayer, and who's really pulling the strings, we should probably talk about Will Byers. Because after episode 4, everything about Will Byers has changed. And honestly, it's been a long time coming. Will's power reveal in Sorcerer is one of those moments that feels both completely surprising and totally inevitable at the same time. We've spent 5 seasons watching this kid get possessed, infected, used as a spy, and generally tortured by the Upside Down. He's been the victim more than anyone else in the series. So seeing him finally tap into actual abilities, seeing him turn that connection into a weapon instead of a weakness, it's satisfying in a way that's hard to describe. The scene itself is pretty incredible. Will, Mike, Lucas and Robin are being chased through the Upside Down by 3 demogorgons. They're cornered, there's no escape. Mike is shouting, Robin is trying to fight, and Lucas is basically accepting that this is how they die. And then Will just stops running. He closes his eyes. His nose starts bleeding, that telltale sign we've seen from 11 1,000 times, and he tears the demogorgons apart. Not with a weapon, not by running or hiding or getting lucky, with his mind. He snaps their limbs. He can see through their eyes, he realizes in that moment, because they're all part of the same hive mind. He's connected to them through Vecna, and that connection goes both ways. So he uses it. He reaches into their consciousness and destroys them from the inside. 3 massive creatures, dead in seconds. The final shot of Volume 1 is Will raising his head, wiping the blood from his nose with his sleeve, and staring into the distance with this look of purpose and power. It's a massive moment for his character. Noah Schnapp, who plays Will, has said in interviews that he sees the relationship between Will and Vecna as very similar to Harry Potter and Voldemort. And yeah, the parallels are pretty obvious once you start looking for them. Both were marked as children by an evil force. Both have a psychic connection to that force that works in both directions. Both can sense when the villain is near, feel what the villain is feeling, even see what the villain is seeing sometimes. And both are, in a way, part of that villain. In Harry Potter, the reveal is that Harry became an accidental Horcrux when Voldemort tried to kill him as a baby. A piece of Voldemort's soul lodged itself in Harry, which is why they're connected, why Harry can speak Parseltongue, why he has these visions. And the ultimate revelation is that for Voldemort to truly die, Harry has to die too. The Horcrux inside him has to be destroyed. Sound familiar? Will was infected by Vecna in 1983. We saw it happen in the opening flashback. Vecna deliberately put a piece of the hive mind inside Will, connecting them permanently. That infection never fully went away. It's why Will could feel the mind flare in Season 2. It's why he had visions of the Upside Down in Season 3. It's why he can still sense when something is wrong in Season 5. He's carrying a part of Vecna inside him, just like Harry carried a part of Voldemort. Which raises a pretty horrifying question. If Will is essentially a Horcrux, does he have to die for Vecna to be defeated? I really hope not, but the parallels are hard to ignore. The Duffer Brothers love their references, and they've already acknowledged the Harry Potter comparison. Noah Schnapp basically confirmed it, and if they're deliberately drawing that parallel, they might be preparing us for a similar ending. Will sacrificing himself to take down Vecna once and for all. Fun fact, Ross Duffer has said in interviews that they've been planning for Will to have powers for as long as he can really remember. This wasn't a last-minute decision. It's been in the works since the beginning of the series, which makes sense when you think about it. Will was always special. He was the first victim, the first person taken to the Upside Down. He survived longer than anyone thought possible. He was possessed by the Mind Flayer and lived through it. Of course he was going to develop abilities. The setup has been there all along. What's interesting is how Will unlocks his powers. It happens right after that conversation with Robin about identity and self-acceptance. Robin talks about her journey coming out, about realizing she was looking for answers in other people when she had all the answers inside herself. And Will, who's been struggling with his own identity for the entire series, finally accepts himself. And that acceptance, that moment of internal clarity, is what triggers his powers. The show is drawing a direct line between Will embracing who he is and accessing his abilities. It's not subtle, and I don't think it's meant to be. It's saying that Will's power comes from accepting himself, from stopping trying to be what other people want him to be, and just being Will. Which is actually really beautiful when you think about it. There's also some interesting numerology floating around the fandom about this. 11 is obviously number 11. Carly is number 8. And Will, while he was never officially a lab subject, has powers now. Some fans are doing math. 11 plus 8 equals 19. If you add Will to that, assuming he's somehow tied to Vecna, who is 1, you get 20. Or, if you add them differently, 11 plus 8 plus 1 equals 20. I don't know if the numbers actually mean anything, but Stranger Things does love its numerical symbolism. What we do know is that Will is going to be absolutely critical to defeating Vecna. He has to be. He's been connected to this threat longer than anyone. He was Vecna's first victim, and there's a good chance he'll be instrumental in making sure Vecna is the final victim. It's full circle. It's poetic. It's exactly the kind of storytelling the show has always done. The question is whether Will survives that final confrontation. And honestly, I'm worried. But if we're already worrying about character deaths, we should probably address the elephant in the room. Let's talk about something we've all been dreading. Deaths. Because the Duffer Brothers have promised this season will be brutal, and Volume 1 didn't kill anyone. Which means Volume 2 has a lot of catching up to do. Here's the thing about Stranger Things and character deaths. The show has always been weirdly protective of its core cast. Barb died, which was tragic, but she was barely in 3 episodes. Bob died, and that hurt, but he was a newcomer. Billy died, and okay, that one actually stung because they'd spent time developing him. And Eddie died in Season 4, which was genuinely heartbreaking. But the main crew, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, Will, 11, Max, Nancy, Steve, Jonathan, Robin, Joyce, Hopper, they've all survived. Every single one of them has made it through 4 seasons of increasingly deadly situations. That can't last. Not in a final season, not when the stakes are this high. Matt Duffer has talked about this in interviews. He said that when they consider killing a character, they have to think about the repercussions. What does that death mean for the other characters? How does it affect the story? Is it earned, or is it just shock value? They apparently almost killed Hopper at the end of Season 3, but decided he still had growing to do. His arc wasn't complete, so they gave him the fake-out death and brought him back in Season 4. But now, Everyone's arcs are reaching their conclusions. Everyone's at the point where a death could be meaningful instead of just cruel, which means everyone's vulnerable. So let's talk about who's most at risk. 11 is probably the most likely major character to die, and I hate that I'm saying this, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming. Her death has been foreshadowed since literally the first season. The original plan was for her to die at the end of season 1 when she destroyed the Demogorgon. That was supposed to be her sacrifice, the end of her story. Obviously, they changed that because the show got renewed and Millie Bobby Brown is incredible. But the intention was there from the start. Sacrifice is built into 11's DNA as a character. Then there's what Brenner said in season 2. He told her that her powers would eventually kill her, that using them takes a physical toll, and if she pushes too hard, she won't survive. We've seen the nosebleeds. We've seen her collapse from exhaustion. We've seen her lose her powers entirely because of overuse. The show has been very consistent about showing us that 11's abilities come with a cost. And here's the thing that really seals it. 11 is responsible for the Upside Down being connected to Hawkins in the first place. She's the one who opened the first gate back in 1983 when she made contact with the Demogorgon in the sensory deprivation tank. Yes, she was a child being forced to do it by Brenner, but the gates are still tied to her. Her powers opened them. It would make narrative sense for her powers to be what closes them permanently. The theory is that in the final battle, 11 will have to push her abilities to their absolute limit to seal the Upside Down forever, and that effort will kill her. She'll succeed. She'll save everyone. Hawkins will be safe, the gates will be closed, and Vecna will be destroyed. But 11 won't survive it. It's the ultimate hero's sacrifice, the most tragic and meaningful ending for her character. One Reddit user put it really well. They said, sadly, I think the most likely major character dying would be 11. Her death has been foreshadowed from the start of the show. From the ending of season 1, her sacrifice was the original, intended ending for the show, and the Duffers said, everything will come back full circle. That full circle idea keeps coming up in interviews. The Duffers want the ending to reflect the beginning, and the beginning was 11 sacrificing herself to save her friends. I really, really hope this doesn't happen. But I think it might. Steve Harrington is the other character who feels tragically doomed. And I say tragically because Steve has had maybe the best character arc in the entire series. He started as this douchebag jock in season 1, the guy you were supposed to dislike, and he's become the heart of the show, the babysitter, the protector, the guy who will throw himself into danger without hesitation to save the kids he's somehow become responsible for. That selflessness is exactly what makes him a target. Steve's whole arc has been about becoming a better person, about finding meaning in protecting others, even when it costs him. He's the one who always volunteers for the dangerous jobs. He's the one who gets beaten up, dragged into the Upside Down, nearly strangled by Demobat tails, and he just keeps going. His entire character is built around sacrifice. Matt Duffer has openly said he loves Joe Keery and loves Steve as a character, but that might not be enough to save him. In fact, it might be why he dies, because Steve's death would hurt. It would devastate Dustin, who sees him as a big brother. It would destroy Robin, who's his best friend, and it would emotionally wreck the audience in a way that few other deaths could. There's also that shot in the Volume 2 trailer of Dustin hugging Steve, like he's trying to keep him from disappearing. That doesn't feel like a casual hug. That feels like a goodbye. Plus, Steve's death would clear the romantic runway for Nancy and Jonathan, which is kind of a messed up way to think about it, but it's true. The love triangle has been hanging over the show for seasons, and one way to resolve it definitively is to take one of the options off the table. I don't think the Duffers would kill Steve just for that reason, but it might be a secondary benefit from a storytelling perspective. My prediction? Steve dies saving Dustin. It's the most Steve thing possible. Dustin gets in over his head, Steve throws himself in the way, and he doesn't make it out. It would be heroic and heartbreaking, and absolutely in character. Now let's talk about Max, because her situation is complicated. Max technically died already. At the end of season 4, Vecna killed her. Her heart stopped. Lucas was holding her dead body. And then 11, from inside Max's mind, somehow pulled her back. She restarted Max's heart, but she couldn't wake her up. Max's body is alive, but her consciousness has been trapped in Vecna's mind prison for a year. So the question isn't really whether Max dies, it's whether she escapes. Episode 6 is called Escape from Camazotz, and we know from Volume 1 that Max and Holly are planning to break out of Vecna's mental prison. The episode is described as the most emotional of Volume 2, and the Duffers said the performances make them cry. That could mean Max successfully escapes and reunites with Lucas and her friends, which would be incredibly emotional. Or it could mean she doesn't make it out, or she makes it out but doesn't survive. I'm leaning toward Max surviving, honestly. She's suffered enough. She lost her brother Billy in season 3, right after they were starting to mend their relationship. She's been dealing with grief and trauma and guilt for 2 seasons. She technically died once already. Killing her again, for real this time, feels cruel. And while Stranger Things can be dark, it's not usually cruel for cruelty's sake. There's also the Kate Bush factor. Running Up That Hill became the song of season 4, the thing that saved Max the first time. The lyrics are about making a deal with God, swapping places with someone else to save them. That theme has been hanging over Max's storyline. Some fans think Lucas might somehow swap places with her, sacrificing himself so she can live. I don't know if that's literally going to happen, but the idea of sacrifice and exchange feels important to Max's story. My guess is that Max escapes, but she's changed. Maybe she's blind, since Vecna took her eyes. Maybe she has lasting trauma from spending a year in a nightmare dimension. But I think she lives. The Duffers brought her back for a reason, and that reason isn't to kill her again immediately. Robin is almost certainly safe, not because she's unimportant, but because of what she represents. Robin is the show's primary LGBTQ+ representation. She came out in season 3, she's been exploring her identity and her relationships, and she's finally comfortable with who she is. Killing her now would feel like burying your gaze. That frustrating trope where queer characters are disproportionately killed off. The Duffers are smarter than that. Plus, Will is already carrying the weight of queer tragedy in this series. His journey has been painful and difficult, and he's just now accessing his power and accepting himself. If the show is going to kill a queer character, it's more likely to be Will because of the Horcrux parallel we already discussed. Killing both Robin and Will would be overkill, and killing just Robin would feel random and unnecessary. So Robin lives. Probably. Vecna absolutely dies. There's no question about that. You can't end a series with the main villain still alive and kicking. Justice has to be served. The only real question is how he dies and who delivers the killing blow. My money is on it being a team effort. 11, Will and Carly working together, using their combined powers to destroy him. Or maybe Will has to sacrifice himself to take Vecna down. The Horcrux scenario we talked about. Either way, Vecna doesn't make it out of episode 8. As for the others, it's harder to say. Jonathan feels weirdly vulnerable. He's been kind of sidelined in recent seasons. His character arc isn't as clear as it used to be, and killing him would devastate both Nancy and Will, which would fuel their final confrontation with Vecna. I don't think he dies, but I wouldn't be shocked if he does. Nancy is probably safe. She's too central, too important to too many other characters. Killing her would break Mike, wreck Steve and Jonathan, and derail a huge chunk of the emotional core of the show. Hopper and Joyce feel safe too, mostly because they've already done the whole death fake-out thing with Hopper. Doing it again would be repetitive. They're probably going to survive and finally get their happy ending. Probably. The wild card is Ted Wheeler. Yes, Ted Wheeler, Mike and Nancy's dad. He's been a background character for the entire series, mostly there for comic relief as the oblivious suburban dad who has no idea what's happening. But in Volume 1, he actually stepped up. He charged at a demogorgon with a golf club to protect his family. And there's that shot in the trailer of Nancy washing blood off her hands. Whose blood? Could be anyone's, could be Ted's. If Ted dies, it would be the first real loss the Wheeler family experiences. Karen almost died, but survived. Holly was taken, but seems like she'll escape. Nancy and Mike have been in danger constantly, but always made it through. Ted dying would shatter that safety and give both Nancy and Mike a huge emotional motivation going into the final battle. I'm not saying it's likely, but it's possible. Here's what I think actually happens. At least one major character dies, probably two. Steve is my top prediction, with 11 as a close second. Max survives but is changed. Robin, Nancy, Mike, Lucas, Dustin, Jonathan, Joyce and Hopper all make it out alive. And Vecna? Vecna gets absolutely destroyed. But we won't know for sure until December 25th, since we're already in the mindset of worst case scenarios. Let's talk about one of the darker theories out there. What if Will getting powers isn't actually a good thing? I know. We just spent a whole section celebrating Will's big moment, talking about how empowering it was, and how he's finally turned his connection to the Upside Down into a weapon. But there's this nagging theory that won't go away, and it's deeply unsettling. The theory is that Will's powers aren't a gift. They're part of Vecna's plan, and Will, without realizing it, might be serving as Vecna's secret weapon. Let's go back to that opening flashback in episode 1. We see young Will getting taken, and we see Vecna deliberately infecting him with the hive mind. That wasn't random. That wasn't opportunistic. Vecna chose Will specifically. He put something inside him, connected them permanently, and then let Will go back to the real world. Why would he do that if he didn't have a long-term plan? Think about Season 2, Will the Spy. That entire storyline was about the Mind Flayer using Will to gather information about Hawkins and the people trying to stop it. Will couldn't control it. He didn't even realize it was happening most of the time. The Mind Flayer would take over, use his eyes and ears to spy, and then retreat before anyone noticed. Will was a Trojan horse, a way for the enemy to infiltrate without anyone suspecting. What if that's still happening? What if Will's new powers are just a more advanced version of the same thing? Here's the scary part. Will's powers work through the hive mind. He can see through the Demogorgon's eyes because they're all connected through Vecna. He can control them because he's tapping into that shared consciousness. But that connection goes both ways. If Will can access the hive mind, then the hive mind can access Will. And the hive mind is controlled by Vecna. So when Will uses his powers, when he reaches out through that connection to destroy Demogorgons, or sense where Vecna is, he's also potentially giving Vecna a direct line into his head. He's opening a door. And Vecna has proven very good at walking through doors people don't realize are open. The theory is that Vecna has been cultivating Will for years, infecting him as a child, possessing him in Season 2, maintaining that connection even when Will seemed free, all of it building toward this moment. Giving Will powers makes him useful, makes him powerful, makes him feel like he's finally fighting back. But really, he's just becoming a more effective tool. Think about the timing. Will gains his powers right when the final battle is approaching, right when 11 and the others need all the help they can get, right when an extra set of psychic abilities would be desperately useful. Convenient, right? Or is it planned? Some fans are pointing to the numerology as evidence. 11 plus 8 equals 19. Add Will and you get 20. Or, depending on how you count it, 11 plus 8 plus 1, if you assume Will is somehow tied to Vecna, who is 1, equals 20. What if that math isn't accidental? What if the numbers represent something? A combination lock that, when activated, gives Vecna exactly what he needs. There's also precedent for this kind of betrayal in the show. Billy was taken over by the Mind Flayer in Season 3 and used to build an army. He gathered people, flayed them, turned them into extensions of the Mind Flayer's will. And Billy had no idea it was happening until it was too late. By the time he realized what he'd become, the damage was done. He managed to break free at the end, to sacrifice himself and save 11. But that doesn't change the fact that he was compromised for most of the season. What's to stop the same thing from happening to Will? He's been connected to this evil force for way longer than Billy was. The infection runs deeper. The control might be more subtle, harder to detect, but no less real. And here's the most heartbreaking possibility. What if Will has to turn against his friends? What if there's a moment in Volume 2 where Vecna activates whatever he put inside Will back in 1983, and suddenly Will isn't Will anymore? He's looking at Mike and Lucas and his mum with Vecna's eyes. He's using his new powers not to protect them, but to hurt them. Imagine 11 having to fight Will. Imagine Joyce having to watch her son, the kid she's fought so hard to save, over and over again, become the thing she's been fighting against. That would be devastating, absolutely brutal, and honestly, kind of brilliant storytelling, if done right. Now, I don't actually think this is going to happen. The counter-argument is pretty strong. Will's character arc has been about agency and self-acceptance. Making him a puppet again would undermine all of that growth. Plus, the scene where he gains his powers is directly tied to Robin's speech about finding strength within yourself. The show is framing his abilities as something positive, something that comes from accepting who he is. Turning that into a trap would feel like a betrayal of the audience and the character. But the fact that it's even plausible, that's what makes it scary. The pieces are there, the setup exists. Vecna absolutely could be playing a longer game than anyone realizes. And Will, who's been a victim from day one, could still be trapped in a nightmare he doesn't even know he's in. I hope I'm wrong about this. I really do. Will deserves better, but Stranger Things has never been shy about putting its characters through hell. Now, speaking of theories that thankfully got debunked, let's talk about the D&D game theory. Okay, let's talk about one theory that's been floating around forever. And the good news is the Duffer Brothers finally put it to rest. The theory is this: nothing that's happened since season 1 has been real. Will actually died when he was taken to the Upside Down. He never came back. And everything we've watched for the past 5 seasons has been an elaborate Dungeons and Dragons campaign that Mike is running in his basement. The monsters, the adventures, the relationships, all of it. Just a game. A way for the kids to cope with losing their friend. It's one of those theories that sounds clever on paper, very meta, very self-aware, the kind of twist that some shows would absolutely try to pull. Stranger Things has always used D&D as a framing device, right? The kids play campaigns, they name the monsters after D&D creatures, they use the game to make sense of the horror they're facing. So why not take that one step further and reveal that the entire show has been them playing D&D all along? Here's why. Because that would be absolutely terrible. It was all a dream ending. The worst possible cop-out in storytelling. You spend years investing in characters, watching them grow and struggle and fight for their lives. And then the show turns around and says, actually, none of it mattered. It was all pretend. Everything you cared about, not real. All those emotional moments, all that character development, all those relationships you got invested in, just a game. Reset. The end. It negates everything. Every sacrifice Bob made, every time Steve got beaten up protecting the kids, every moment of 11 learning what it means to have a family, Joyce fighting to save her son, Hopper crawling out of a Russian prison. None of it would have actually happened. It would all be imaginary. And what's the point of caring about imaginary stakes in a show that's already fictional? It's too many layers of removal. It makes the audience feel cheated. Thankfully, Ross Duffer explicitly shut this down in an interview with Junkie. Someone asked him about the theory, and he just straight up said, "It's not just a make-believe D&D game that Mike's running in his basement. That's not a real one." Done. Theory dead. Thank God. Matt Duffer has also talked about how they studied series finales they loved while writing season 5. Shows like 6 Feet Under, Friday Night Lights, even The Sopranos despite its controversial ending. And the lesson they took from those finales, The best ones were very true to themselves. The shows that are trying to be super clever, he said, I think that's where it can go wrong really quickly. That's a direct rejection of the kind of twist the D&D theory represents. It's too clever. It prioritizes the gotcha moment over emotional honesty, and the Duffers clearly don't want to make that mistake. They want an ending that feels true to what Stranger Things has always been. A story about friendship, about fighting monsters together, about love and loyalty, and the power of holding on to hope even when everything seems hopeless. You can't deliver that kind of ending if you reveal it was all fake. The D&D theory also fundamentally misunderstands what role the game plays in the show. Dungeons and Dragons isn't the reality of Stranger Things. It's the language the kids use to process reality. It gives them a framework for understanding things that would otherwise be incomprehensible. When they encounter a faceless monster, calling it a demogorgon makes it less terrifying because it turns it into something from a game they know how to beat. When they face a psychic villain, calling him Vecna gives them a shared vocabulary for talking about the threat. The game is a coping mechanism, a translation tool, not the actual truth of what's happening. So yeah, we can officially cross this theory off the list. Everything that's happened is real within the world of the show. The stakes are genuine, the deaths matter, and when characters finally defeat Vecna and close the Upside Down for good, it'll be because they actually did it, not because someone rolled a 20-sided die. Thank God for that. Now let's talk about some character-specific theories, starting with a reunion that nobody saw coming. Let's talk about one of Volume 1's biggest reveals. Carly is alive, and that changes everything. Carly, also known as 8, showed up in one of the most controversial episodes of the entire series. Season 2, Episode 7, The Lost Sister. It's the episode where 11 leaves Hawkins, goes to Chicago, and finds her lab sister living with a gang of misfits. Carly has illusion powers. She can make people see things that aren't there, create phantom images, manipulate perception. It's a really cool ability, and the episode explores this whole punk aesthetic and revenge storyline that felt super different from the rest of the show. And fans hated it. Not universally, but enough that it became this infamous episode. People felt like it killed the momentum of Season 2 right before the finale. It felt disconnected from the main story. It introduced all these new characters we'd never see again. And then after that one episode, Carly just disappeared. 11 went back to Hawkins, the plot moved on, and 8 was never mentioned again. Until now. Volume 1, Episode 4. Hopper and 11 break into the military's Upside Down facility, expecting to find Vecna. They fight their way through soldiers, dodge capture, and finally make it to this heavily guarded cell. Hopper is ready to blow everything up with his bomb vest if necessary. 11 is psyching herself up for the confrontation. They open the door, and there she is. Not Vecna, Carly. Alive, imprisoned, and apparently being used by Dr. K for reasons we don't fully understand yet. It's a massive moment, and honestly, it's a really smart move by the Duffers. In interviews, they've talked about how Carly's storyline felt like an unfinished thread. They liked Linnea Berthelsen, the actress who plays her, and felt like that one episode didn't give her a chance to do what they knew she was capable of. So bringing her back serves two purposes. It ties up a loose plot strand, so the show doesn't feel like it abandoned a character, and it gives Carly an actual role in the endgame. Because here's the thing, Carly's powers are incredibly useful against someone like Vecna, illusions, mental manipulation, the ability to make people see things that aren't real. Vecna operates primarily through mental attacks. He gets inside people's heads, shows them their trauma, uses their worst memories against them. That's his whole thing. But what happens when someone who can create false memories and phantom images goes up against him? What happens when Vecna can't tell what's real and what's an illusion? It levels the playing field. The Volume 2 trailer shows 11 asking Carly to help her find and kill Vecna. Carly seems hesitant, which makes sense. She's just been freed from military captivity. She's probably traumatized. And 11 is asking her to immediately jump into another fight. But the fact that 11 is asking at all means she recognizes what Carly brings to the table. She needs her sister. And that's the other important thing here, the sister relationship. 11 spent most of her life alone, isolated, used as a weapon. She's found family with Joyce and Hopper, with Mike and the others. But Kaylee is the only person who truly understands what it was like in the lab. They both grew up as numbered experiments, they both have powers, they both escaped Brenner's control. That bond is unique. There's also the numbers thing. 11 is 011, Carly is 08. Add them together and you get 0119. I don't know if that specific number means anything, but Stranger Things loves its numerical symbolism. The fact that two lab children are teaming up feels significant. It raises the question of whether there are other numbered kids out there. We know at least some of them died. Vecna, when he was 1, killed most of them during his massacre at the lab. But maybe not all of them. Maybe there are others who escaped, who've been hiding, who could show up in these final episodes. Probably not, though. Introducing a bunch of new powered characters this late would be messy. It's more likely that 11 and Carly, and Will with his new abilities, are the powered individuals we're working with for the finale. What I'm most curious about is how Carly's powers will actually work in practice. We saw her create illusions in Season 2, making people see phantom attackers, disguising herself and others, but we've never seen her use those abilities in actual combat against supernatural threats. Can she fool a Demogorgon? Can she create an illusion so convincing that even Vecna's hive mind believes it? Can she make Vecna see an army of 11s coming at him when really there's just one? That would be incredibly cool, actually. Imagine Vecna being overwhelmed by dozens of illusory 11s all attacking at once, and he can't figure out which one is real until it's too late. That's the kind of creative power application that would justify bringing Carly back. The emotional reunion between 11 and Carly deserves attention too. These two haven't seen each other since 1985. That's 2 years in the show's timeline. A lot has happened to both of them. 11 lost Hopper, got him back, lost her powers, got them back, fell in love, faced Vecna. Carly's been imprisoned by the military, possibly experimented on again, definitely traumatized. They've both been through hell separately. Coming back together now, at the end of everything, feels right. So 11's not fighting alone anymore. She's got her sister back. She's got Will with his new powers. She's got all her friends, all the people she's learned to love and trust. And together, they might actually stand a chance. But there's one beloved character who definitely won't be making a comeback, despite what a lot of fans hoped. Let's talk about Eddie Munson, because a lot of fans really wanted him to come back. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news here. Eddie died in Season 4, and it was one of the most emotionally devastating deaths the show has ever done. He sacrificed himself fighting off a swarm of Demobats so that Dustin could escape. He bought them time. He went out playing Master of Puppets on guitar in the Upside Down, which is possibly the most metal death in television history. And it hurt. Eddie had only been in the show for 1 season, but he made such an impact that losing him felt like losing someone who'd been there from the beginning. So naturally, fans started theorizing about ways he could come back. The main theory centered around a Dungeons & Dragons character called Cass the Bloody-Handed. In D&D lore, Cass was Vecna's most trusted lieutenant, a vampire who eventually betrayed his master. The theory was that Eddie, having been killed by Demobats in the Upside Down, would be resurrected by Vecna as a vampire. The connection seemed obvious. Bats, vampire. Eddie's body was left in the Upside Down, so Vecna could easily find it and use it. Plus, Eddie playing the Kaz role, the trusted ally who turns against Vecna at the crucial moment, would be a perfect redemption arc. It's a cool theory. I get why people latched onto it. Joseph Quinn was incredible as Eddie, and the idea of getting him back in some form, even as a vampire working for the enemy, was appealing. It would give Eddie's story a continuation instead of just ending with his death. But it's not happening. Ross Duffer shut it down explicitly in an interview. He said there's some wild theories, even for season 5. Eddie is not a vampire. I will say that much. Just straight up confirmed it. Eddie's dead. He's staying dead. Joseph Quinn is not returning to Stranger Things in any capacity. And honestly, that's the right call. Eddie's death worked. It was tragic and heroic, and it meant something. He died proving he wasn't a coward, which was his whole arc in season 4. He spent the entire season running from danger, hiding, being accused of murders he didn't commit. And in the end, he chose to stand and fight. He chose to be brave. Bringing him back, especially as a vampire servant of Vecna, would undermine that sacrifice. It would cheapen what he did. Fun. Fact, the Cars theory actually would make for a really interesting spin-off comic or alternate timeline story. Eddie as a vampire lieutenant, slowly regaining his humanity and turning against Vecna? That's compelling. But it doesn't work for the main show, not this late in the game, with this many other plot threads to resolve. So Eddie's gone. He's not coming back. But his legacy lives on through Dustin, through the Hellfire Club, through the impact he had on everyone who knew him. Sometimes dead characters need to stay dead. It's more respectful to let them rest. Now let's talk about theories involving characters who are still alive and very much in danger. Holly Wheeler is 7 years old, and somehow she's become one of the most important characters in the entire show. I don't think anyone saw that coming. Holly's been a background character since season 1. She's the youngest Wheeler, Nancy and Mike's little sister, mostly there to be cute and oblivious while the actual plot happens around her. She's had maybe a dozen lines across 4 seasons. But season 5 changed everything. Episode 2 is literally titled The Vanishing of Holly Wheeler. A Demogorgon breaks into the Wheeler house, attacks Karen, throws Ted through a wall, and drags Holly into the Upside Down. She ends up in Vecna's mind prison, this nightmare dimension constructed from Henry Creel's memories. And she's been there ever since, trapped with Max, trying to survive. What makes Holly interesting is how she's handling it. She's 7. She should be completely terrified, traumatized, unable to cope. But instead she's using her favourite book as a survival guide. A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. It's this classic science fiction novel about a girl named Meg who travels through dimensions to rescue her father from an evil entity called IT that controls people's minds. The planet where IT lives is called Camazotz, and everyone there is under mental control, their individuality erased. Holly sees the parallels immediately. She's trapped in a mind prison on what might as well be Camazotz. Vecna is basically IT, a malevolent force that controls minds and feeds on fear. And she's Meg, the kid who has to be brave and clever to escape. It's a pretty sophisticated connection for a 7-year-old to make, but Holly's always been a smart kid. Nell Fisher, who plays her, is doing an incredible job making Holly feel both childlike and surprisingly capable. Episode 6 is called Escape from Camazotz, which basically confirms that this is Holly and Max's episode. They're making their move. They're trying to break out of Vecna's mental prison and get back to reality. The Duffers have said it's the biggest episode of Volume 2, and that the performances make them cry every time they watch it, which could mean a lot of things. Maybe they succeed, and the reunion is emotional. Maybe they don't succeed, and it's devastating. Maybe they succeed, but something terrible happens in the process. What's really interesting is the cave system that Max has been hiding in. Vecna is afraid of it. He won't go in there. Max mentions this in episode 4, and it's such a strange detail. Why would Vecna be afraid of anything in his own mind prison? These are his memories, his domain. He controls everything. What could possibly scare him about a cave? One theory is that the cave represents something from Henry Creel's childhood that he's repressed or trying to forget. Maybe it's connected to his first encounter with the Mind Flayer in Dimension X, which happened in a cave according to the first shadow. Maybe going in there would force him to confront memories he's been avoiding, truths about himself he doesn't want to face. And that vulnerability, that psychological weak point, might be exactly what Holly and Max can exploit. Holly's innocence could be a weapon here. She doesn't have years of trauma like Max does. She hasn't been worn down by repeated exposure to horror. She's just a kid who loves books about brave girls fighting evil. That purity of perspective might let her see things Max can't. She might be able to navigate Vecna's memories in ways that an older, more damaged person couldn't. There's also something poetic about the youngest Wheeler being the one who figures out how to escape. Mike and Nancy have been fighting the Upside Down for 5 seasons. They've been the heroes, the leaders, the ones who solve problems. But Holly? She's been on the sidelines, protected, kept away from danger. Now she's in the thick of it, and she's holding her own. The Wheeler family has always been important to the story, but this feels like their final evolution. Everyone contributes, everyone fights, even the 7-year-old with a book about tesseracts. Fun fact, Nell Fisher is apparently incredible on set. The Duffers have praised her performance, and Sadie Sink has talked about how much she enjoyed working with her in the mind prison scenes. For a young actress, taking on such an emotionally intense role, she's really delivering. My prediction for episode 6, Holly and Max make it out. They escape Vecna's mind prison, probably using some combination of Holly's insights from A Wrinkle in Time and Max's sheer stubborn determination to survive. But the escape costs something. Maybe Vecna learns something from their attempt. Maybe they bring something back with them unintentionally. Maybe the act of breaking out weakens the barriers between dimensions even further. Either way, episode 6 is going to be massive, and Holly Wheeler is going to prove that you don't have to be a teenager with superpowers to be a hero. Sometimes, you just need a good book and the courage to keep going. Since we're talking about surprising heroes, we should talk about the adults finally stepping up to fight. The parents are finally getting involved. And it's about time, honestly. For 4 seasons, the kids have been fighting monsters, while their parents remained mostly oblivious. Joyce has been the exception. She's been in the thick of it since season 1, refusing to accept that Will was dead, tearing apart her house looking for him, travelling to Russia to rescue Hopper. Joyce has always fought. But the other parents, Karen Wheeler, Ted Wheeler, even Claudia Henderson with Dustin, they've been kept in the dark, protected, unaware of the actual danger their children face every day. Volume 1 changed that for the Wheelers. Karen Wheeler has this moment in episode 2 that's absolutely brilliant. She's taking a bath, drinking wine, completely unaware that a Demogorgon has broken into her house. Then she hears Holly scream. She gets out of the tub, grabs the wine bottle, breaks it, and uses it as a weapon to defend her daughter. She fights a literal monster from another dimension in her bathrobe with a broken wine bottle. It's badass and terrifying, and exactly what a mother would do when her child is in danger. Cara Buono, who plays Karen, has said in interviews that she had no idea this scene was coming. She just thought she'd be the oblivious suburban mum forever. But the Duffers wrote this for her, gave her this incredible moment of maternal fury, and she absolutely delivered. Karen gets slashed by the Demogorgon's claws. She's knocked unconscious, but she fought. She didn't run. She didn't freeze. She stood between her daughter and a monster. And Ted Wheeler, the dad who's been a punchline for 5 seasons, the guy who falls asleep in his chair and complains about the government and has zero awareness of anything happening around him. He charged a Demogorgon with a golf club. It didn't work. The Demogorgon threw him through a wall, but he tried. He saw his family in danger, and he grabbed the closest weapon he could find, and he attacked. That's growth. That's a dad who, when it actually mattered, stepped up, which brings us to a theory that's been gaining traction. Ted Wheeler might die in Volume 2. The Wheeler family has been remarkably safe throughout the series. Nancy has been in constant danger, sure, but she's always survived. Mike has faced down Demogorgons and the Mind Flayer and Vecna, but he's always made it through. Holly just got taken, but it looks like she'll escape. Karen was attacked but survived. The Wheelers have had close calls, but they've never experienced real loss. Not like the Byers family, who lost Bob. Not like the Sinclairs, who almost lost Max. If Ted dies, it would shatter that safety. It would give Nancy and Mike a massive emotional wound going into the final battle. And there's some evidence pointing toward it. In the Volume 2 trailer, there's a shot of Nancy washing blood off her hands. She looks devastated. Whose blood is it? Could be anyone's. Could be from fighting Demogorgons or helping injured friends, but it could also be her father's. Ted dying would be the kind of death the Duffers have talked about. Earned not just for shock value. He's been the distant, disconnected dad for the entire series. Having him die protecting his family would complete his arc. It would show that when it really mattered, he was there. And it would hurt in a way that feels meaningful rather than cruel. Joyce and Hopper are already veterans at this point. They've been fighting the Upside Down for years. They know what they're up against. And Murray, the paranoid conspiracy theorist, who somehow ended up being right about everything, has become their ally and friend. These adults have proven themselves over and over, but the parents who've been on the sidelines, this is their moment. Karen fought, Ted fought, and if some of them don't survive, if the cost of protecting their children is their own lives, that would be devastating but appropriate. The kids have been shouldering this burden for so long. Maybe it's time for the adults to carry some of the weight, even if it destroys them. Now let's talk about the location that everything keeps circling back to. There's this wall in the Upside Down that nobody can quite figure out. And it's driving everyone crazy trying to understand what it's hiding. The wall shows up in episodes 3 and 4. Hopper and 11 encounter it on one side while they're exploring the Upside Down military base. Later, Dustin, Nancy, Steve and Jonathan find the same wall from the opposite direction. And it's not subtle, it's massive, circular, fleshy, organic looking, like it grew there instead of being built. And it's clearly protecting something inside. Dustin is the one who figures out the geometry of it. He realizes that the wall isn't just a barrier, it's a complete circle. They're on the outside, something important is on the inside, and whatever that something is, it's being guarded. Wounded Demogorgons keep retreating to it, limping back like they're seeking shelter, or reporting to headquarters. The wall isn't random, it's purposeful. So what's behind it? The two main theories are that it's either Vecna's true lair or the Mind Flayer's core. Vecna's lair makes sense because he needs a base of operations, somewhere he's conducting his plans and controlling the hive mind. The wall would keep him safe from attack, hidden from anyone trying to hunt him down. It's a fortress. When the characters finally break through in Volume 2, which they absolutely will because that's where the story is heading, they'll find him waiting. The Mind Flayer's core theory is more interesting though. What if the wall isn't protecting Vecna? What if it's protecting something older, something more fundamental to the Upside Down itself? The Mind Flayer is supposed to be this ancient entity, right? It existed before Vecna, before the gates, before any of this started. So where is it physically? The shadow monster form we saw in seasons 2 and 3 was a manifestation, but where's the actual source? What if it's behind that wall, hidden away, pulsing with power, while Vecna does its dirty work? That would make the wall the single most important location in the entire Upside Down. Break through it, and you're not just finding Vecna, you're finding the heart of everything. There's also the question of why wounded Demogorgons go there. Are they being healed? Are they reporting? Are they being absorbed back into the hive mind? Recycled into something else? The show hasn't explained it yet, but the behaviour suggests that whatever's behind the wall, it's the centre of the hive. The queen bee, metaphorically speaking. Everything else is just drones. What's really interesting is how this connects back to Hawkins' lab. The Volume 2 trailer shows Nancy, Steve, Jonathan and Dustin going back to the ruins of Hawkins' lab. It's been destroyed since Season 1, abandoned and sealed off. but they're returning for a reason. And Dustin says in the trailer, everything we've ever assumed about the Upside Down has been dead wrong. That's a massive statement. Everything? That suggests they're about to discover something fundamental about how the Upside Down works, where it came from, why it's connected to Hawkins specifically. Hawkins' lab is where it all started. Eleven opened the first gate there in 1983 when she made contact with the Demogorgon during a sensory deprivation experiment. That gate connected our world to the Upside Down and kicked off the entire series. But what if the lab's connection to the Upside Down goes deeper than that? What if there was something about that specific location that made the gate possible in the first place? Some fans think there might be a natural weak point between dimensions right under Hawkins' lab. Something that existed before the lab was built, before Brenner started experimenting on children. The government chose that location for a reason. Maybe they knew something. Maybe they detected dimensional anomalies, energy readings, something that suggested the barriers between worlds were thinner there. And Eleven's powers didn't create the connection. They just ripped open what was already fragile. Fun fact, the first shadow play suggests that Henry Creel's childhood home had some kind of dimensional portal in the basement. The Creel house is also in Hawkins, so there are at least two locations in this small Indiana town where the Upside Down has broken through. That can't be coincidence. Hawkins itself might be special, a nexus point, a place where dimensions naturally overlap. If that's true, then going back to Hawkins' lab makes perfect sense. It's ground zero. It's where the scientific investigation into these phenomena was centered. And if there are answers about what the Upside Down actually is, where it came from, how to close it permanently, those answers are probably buried in the ruins of the lab. The wall and the lab are connected, even if we don't know how yet. The wall is protecting something in the Upside Down. The lab was studying something in our world. When the characters break through that wall and uncover whatever's been hidden, when they dig through the lab's ruins and find the research Brenner was keeping secret, that's when the full picture will finally come together. And honestly, I think it's going to recontextualize everything we thought we knew. The Duffers have been building toward this for 5 seasons. Every mystery, every unanswered question, every weird detail that didn't quite make sense, it's all pointing toward a revelation. The Upside Down isn't just a random alternate dimension. It's something specific. It has a purpose, an origin, a reason for existing. And once we understand what it really is, the path to defeating it will become clear. Or at least, that's the hope. Because if they break through that wall and it's just Vecna sitting there on a throne made of vines, I'm going to be a little disappointed. We've earned something bigger than that. But there's another theory that might be even bigger. One that involves time itself. There are dozens of other theories floating around. Some plausible, some absolutely bonkers. The idea that Vecna is trying to manipulate time itself, turning back the clock to undo being sent to the Upside Down. The theory that the Thessal Hydra is actually the Mind Flayer's true form. Wild speculation about Mike being the heart who has to die to save everyone else. Predictions about Dr. Brenner appearing in flashbacks. Theories about Vicky, Robin's girlfriend, playing a bigger role. About multiple 11s created through Carly's illusions. About the whole series ending with a flash forward, showing everyone's futures. Some of these will be right, most will be wrong. That's the fun of theorizing. What we know for sure is this. Volume 2 drops on Christmas Day. 3 episodes, Shock Jock, Escape from Camazotz and The Bridge. Then the finale on New Year's Eve, over 2 hours long, titled The Right Side Up. Someone's going to die, probably multiple someones. Vecna will be defeated, though maybe not in the way we expect. And the Upside Down? One way or another, this is the end of it. However it concludes, one thing's certain. We're not ready to say goodbye, but honestly, we probably should start preparing ourselves now. And that, my dear friends, is where we'll end tonight's deep dive into Stranger Things theories. Volume 2 is just days away. The finale comes right after. And in less than 2 weeks, we'll know how this whole story ends. In a future video, I'll definitely come back and break down what actually happened, which theories were right, which were hilariously wrong, and how it all came together. But until then, stay safe and sweet dreams.